We're continuing our ABC series on the Gospel of John. And last week, Dan Schleter covered John chapters 4, 5, and 6. I wanted to take a look at John chapter 4 to talk about the dynamic of the Samaritans and the Jewish people. This video is part of an effort on my end and from others in the future to give you just a little bit more from the Gospel of John. We are trying to do 3 weeks at a time, or 3 chapters at a time per week in ABC. So next week, this upcoming week, will be chapters 7, 8, and 9. And we've realized that there's a lot of meat on the bone still. There's just not enough time within that 1-hour class to in-depth cover all 3 of any section of chapters. So we want to include these videos as a resource to be a little bit longer than Digging Deeper, but shorter than ABC, for you to be able to go back to learn a little bit more about John's Gospel, to maybe discover some tips and some tools for how to read this and to understand all the connections that John is making and that Jesus is making, to understand some of the images and ideas that are being developed, and hopefully just be a blessing to you as you continue to read and study Scripture as part of a renewed effort in 2025. So I figured for this first video, I would go back to John chapter 4, and like I said, explore that dynamic and very briefly go over kind of the history of those 2 groups. So in John 4, Jesus is going to go through Samaria, which would have been unusual for a Jewish man, especially for a Jewish rabbi. Not the typical route that a Jewish man would make at that time. See, Jesus is from Galilee. Most of his ministry and most of the stories we read about him tend to take place in Galilee, and he travels often to Jerusalem, especially in John's Gospel. He's there for feasts and festivals and for important occasions. But between Galilee, which is in the north, and Jerusalem, which is south of there, between those 2 things is Samaria. And so most Jewish people, instead of going through Samaria and associating with the Samaritans, they would typically take a route that would go, that would cross the Jordan River, would go south through what we call the country of Jordan today, and then would go around the Sea of Galilee, down the Jordan River, until they got to like the Jericho crossing, and there they would cross and go to the Holy City. So that would have been the normal expected route. And this is all a product of centuries of kind of division and a hostility that developed between the Samaritans and the Jewish people. So the Samaritans are the product, ultimately, of the split between Israel and Judah. You remember when Solomon died, that his united kingdom split into 2, and in the north was Israel, and in the south was Judah. And Israel fell into idolatry and false worship almost immediately. They had lots of different idols, and eventually, in about 722, they were conquered by Assyria. And part of that conquering meant that a number of those people were exiled, and there was a small group of people that were left behind to stay and work in the land. And that remnant of Jewish people, over time, Assyria sent peoples from the other parts of their empire to settle in the land, to work the land, because it was still important to the empire, and it's in a strategic place between the African subcontinent and Asia and Europe. And so it's in an important place, and that land was fertile and was good for farming. And so they sent people into that land, and eventually the people from Israel and the people from the other parts of the Assyrian Empire intermingled and got married and had children. And what happened is it created a kind of subculture of a group of people that had some Jewish background, that still had the first 5 books of Scripture, like the Torah, but they had additional beliefs and not that weren't coherent or orthodox with Jewish belief and the strict Jewish belief system. And so it was kind of this weird commingling, this impurity that grew within that community, and they were not well received by the people of Judah or Jews in the future. So over time, what happens in 587 is Judah is conquered by Babylon. Babylon sends the people of Judah into exile. But when Babylon is conquered by Persia, eventually Cyrus of Persia allows the Jews in Babylon, in the Babylonian Empire, to return to the Holy Land. And so they return and they begin the process of rebuilding Jerusalem and ultimately of rebuilding the temple. And while they are rebuilding the temple, there's a story in Ezra and Nehemiah of Samaritans offering to help rebuild the temple, and they are rejected and turned away because of this weird mix of kind of pagan beliefs and pagan practices and Jewish belief and Jewish monotheism and the influence of the Torah. They were rejected because they were viewed as these kind of half-blood perversions of Jewish faith and Jewish practice, and that stigma stayed with the Samaritan people all the way into the time of Jesus. And so for Jesus to go through Samaria would have been unexpected for a man who is a Jewish rabbi, for a man who is ritually pure and keeps the law. And so it creates this really unusual interaction and a profound interaction when you read this story from John 4 of this woman of Samaria who is a societal outcast in her own community, right? She's drawing water at the 6th hour, which is noon. You think about in a world, in a society where you need to draw your own water from a well, you probably don't want to do that in the middle of the day because it's hot and that would make it more strenuous. You would typically do that in the morning before the work has begun, before the sun is all the way risen in the sky. And so it's not a coincidence that Jesus meets this woman at this well, that she is kind of a societal outcast from her own Samaritan village. But what you see here is an unexpected interaction in which Jesus is surprisingly candid and straightforward with this woman. He is inviting her to ask him for living water. He talks about himself as the Messiah, the Christ. He tells her that's who he is. And we see this profound response from her, whereas with others in this gospel, especially the people of God, the Jewish people, there is disbelief in the words of Jesus. They do not receive what he has to say. They do not receive his testimony about himself. But this woman begins to believe, and she responds to Jesus in a powerful way. She doesn't just believe for herself. She takes this statement from Jesus and she brings it to her village. It's an act of evangelism where she talks about, this man has shown up and he's telling me things about myself. Could he be the Christ? And it eventually leads to this powerful moment when this Samaritan community is coming through the fields and Jesus is talking with his disciples and he says, look, the fields are white for the harvest, talking about the Samaritans. And this passage of Scripture, especially with the full context of the divisions and the hostilities that existed between Jewish peoples and Samaritan peoples, is really challenging and powerful for us as the church today to consider our presuppositions about others, to consider the hostility that we face towards others, or to consider maybe the cultural baggage we hold in our own minds about people who are different than us, people who are other than us. And it's a reminder that the church is an invitation to all people to know and believe and to receive the living water of Jesus Christ. And so we are going to continue to explore the different things Jesus says about himself in this gospel, how they challenge us, how they refresh us, how they orient our view of this world and our mission. And I think what you'll find is the Gospel of John is full of these really powerful insights when you slow down and you read Scripture with a renewed sense of intentionality to actually spend time meditating on the words of Jesus and not just breezing through the narrative, but to really dive deep into the images he's developing and the words he's saying and the people he's speaking to. So I hope that this slightly longer video has given you some good and necessary context to help you go back and read John 4 and then to pick up on things in John 5 and John 6, like the response of unbelief from the invalid who was at the pool of Bethesda, or the authorities that questioned Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, to look at John 6 and Jesus' miracle and the response from the people afterwards when he talks about himself as the bread of life, these people of Israel, as opposed to the Samaritans, when they hear the words of Jesus, they reject them. They walk away from him. So it's this really powerful contrast that's happening between these two people groups, and it's all part of a really really cohesive and compelling narrative that John is putting in front of us for us to read. So God bless you. God bless your reading of Scripture in 2025. I hope you'll watch these videos, and I hope to see you this Sunday.